All right, my babies. Today's video is by Marco Pierre White. Amazing chef. And I haven't tasted his food. He's been basically acknowledged worldwide. And he's kind of like the teacher of chefs or something like this. He's the guy who taught Gordon Ramsay. But the reason I say amazing is because just having a conversation with him is a very, I don't know, it's exposing by nature. Like everything he does when he's talking about food, when he's discussing things, when he's kind of like, exploring the flavors and the mixes and the chemistry behind them, there's kind of like that intensity or that intention behind his existence that is super fucking beautiful. So he said something, I was watching one of his shows once, I don't know, it's Master Chef or something like that. And he literally says, never allow the obvious to blind you. And here we are, we're gonna explore it, me and you together. Never allow the obvious to blind you. And I feel because all right, so I recently read a book called Obvious Adams, right? And it's a story about an advertising agency back in the 1900s, early 1900s, that kept basically trying to be cool and cute, and basically like all advertising agencies were trying to be creative. And then a guy comes in, he goes like, it goes like, the obvious thing to do is to kind of like have this information basically as part of an advertisement, as part of the advertisement. And that's his rationale, because it's always like, and the book started in a beautiful way, because like Adams kind of like meets a guy and he decides he wants to get into advertising. So according to Adam, the most obvious thing to do first was to go and meet the guy in charge of the advertising company he decided he's going to like meet with. It was the obvious thing to do. So he did it. And then when he went to the actual guy, the guy was like, hey man, like I don't think that you're cut up for this. And he goes like, maybe I need to see what I'm thinking of what I have to do to show you that you need to take me seriously, right? Because that's the whole thing. A lot of people kind of like say they want to do something and they're easily swayed. But that guy took a decision, and the obvious thing to do is to follow through. I took a decision. What does it mean to take a decision? And so based on that structure, the whole book's pretense is a lot of the times people kind of like, they see what they want to see and they kind of like start creating around it and developing around it and establishing, elaborating, and all that things around it. Well, he succeeded in just kind of like taking the obvious and kind of like translating it in a creative way. Our biggest problem as people is basically I feel like we project the parts of ourselves that they want the world to see. So if you were talking to a doctor, he would respond from a doctor's perspective, right? We carry the identity with us. I guess that's what what I'm trying to say. Is everyone kind of like has the identity around them that they always try to kind of like hold on to and grab onto and build around. And I feel that kind of like takes us away from the obvious, right? Because like, we start, if we're looking at something, we start like, I'm looking at a microphone, right? Like a 3-year-old will tell you this is a microphone. But an engineer would start looking at the technology, a designer would start looking at the shape and all that shit. Like every person will start noticing the things that their life revolves around. And I feel that's where the identity that I'm talking about clicks. So the idea behind the development of structure in your own perception of the world is what I'm talking about, I guess, or the core or the essence of what I'm talking about. Yeah. So and going back, never allow the obvious to blind you. It's it's kind of like, the obvious has its own, we our own biases redirect us from the obvious. So our own biases kind of like create a blind spot for us. But then the obvious itself is basically too generic, too standard, too kind of like simple, which basically limits us. And I feel that's basically the blinding that he's talking about. Right? Like, if the obvious blinds you, then you can't then you can't see the nuances, that you can't see the smaller things around, you can't see the bits and pieces that kind of like make the difference. Right? Whilst when you're actually like engaging with there's your, okay, let me split it one more time. There's your perception and then there's reality. And the reality is the obvious. No, sorry, I'm not going to say reality. There's your perception and then there's the obvious. And the obvious is expressed by whatever you're looking at. And there's your reality, or your basically perception bias is based on how you look at things. So there's how you look at things and what you're looking at. You see that? You see what and how? You see them? They're behind me. So it's how you look at things and what you're looking at. These two. What you're looking at is the obvious. How you're looking at things is your own basically like way of seeing the world. And that is the kind of like connection that I'm talking about. Because ultimately, an individual is spending time with himself. Why am I singing a song? Don't let the obvious blind you, because if you only see the obvious, then everything else around it kind of like dies. But the obvious could only exist the way it does because of the support of everything else that kind of like, allows it to shine. On the other side, we have our own blind spots because of the way we see the world. So the first thing you kind of like have to do is get away from yourself, or like let go of yourself in order to see the obvious. But then the bigger problems is once you see the obvious, the first thing that happens is it kind of like, oh, that's obviously the case, or that's the obvious thing to look at, which means we end up kind of like, getting stuck in that space. The balance in between, or the relationship, or the kind of like connection, the road you build between you and that, because like the way you see, how you see things and what you're looking at creates a certain like relationship in between. And I feel that is where the actual like the creativity starts existing. It doesn't exist from the obvious, and it doesn't exist from everything around the obvious, because I can be creative as possible surrounding the obvious. But the truth is that wouldn't be the truth, because like the obvious is mainly like the truth, or mainly like the core, the solid aspect of it. And on the other side, when it comes to me, my biases are going to be creating blind spots. So I kind of have to get out of those biases and kind of like see the obvious in order to be able to reflect on my biases. But after seeing the obvious through my biases, I get to see the different basically like nuances, or the creative aspects, or the little pieces around the obvious that create it. And all of these exist in the relationship in between me and whatever I'm looking at. So like, never allow the obvious to blind you is really just Marco saying, like, acknowledge what's happening in front of you, or what needs to be done, and then allow for the experimentation surrounding what needs to be done, because that's where you kind of like add your flair, but that's where you also notice the different things around, like what is necessary or what is needed. And how big of a tangent did I go? No, I'm still on point. But you never allow the obvious to blind you. I'm reflecting on you. I'm reflecting on what was obvious, and how both of them are actually blinded. Because I can start with a predisposed kind of like perspective, Like, you know, I don't know. So when you're looking at a tree, you only see basically the green and the branches and the brown. You don't see like the types of trees. A lot of people have that, by the way. They can't differentiate between different trees. They can't. They don't see that detail, and that's basically your own personal bias, basically blinding you. But then on another side, oh, it's obvious it's a tree, but also like it's not just a tree. It's the system that life flies on, lands on, grows through, the carbon absorbed from the atmosphere. Like, you know, it's more than just a tree, which is the obvious. And I feel that's basically how you build a wow. I'm kind of like proud of myself for using this metaphor. Fucking أخو من UK. Marco Pierre White. There's more. There's more from you and there's more from the world. And I think we should remember that there's always that kind of like, you know, the interaction that needs to be watered and nurtured in order for the details based on our intentions to kind of like explore themselves. And ultimately, I don't know more, I just explore more knowledge. Love you guys.